All right, friends, let's begin. So, what is he saying here? The whole Likud of the mind is to explain Atzilus. And the point of explaining Atzilus is that Atzilus is the divine expression that is at once Elikus and at the same time allows for creation to know Elikus, which is on the surface incompatible because Elikus is mutually exclusive. So how in the same breath can you say Einid Mulvadai and somebody else also knows Einid Mulvadai? If Einid Mulvadai, there's no something else. There's no somebody else. So this profound paradox, which lies at the core of everything. So this is reconciled, as it were. Hashem allows for this impossibility. And that's what Atzilus is. That's what the neshama of Moishe Rabbeinu is transparently the mata. And every year, every neshama really embodies this. And the embassy also says, in the Maimers, we might expect at the end, even higher than Atzilus. So the levels, the understanding is subtle. That's the point, that Hashem wants us to know his subtleties, right? A relationship is not just, each other generally. You can have that with many people. The whole point of a relationship, of a marriage, a friendship, is knowing each other in the subtleties. And that's what this is to know Hashem and all of his nuance, kavayachal, his nuanced expressions, which we all reflect because we're made in his image, and hence we can have a relationship. Akol panim. So what did he say now in Oz Gimel? So he spoke about this model. The Chassidus speaks of yesh, ayin, yesh. And in summary, the first yesh is the yesh amiti. The latter, or yesh, is the yesh hanivra. The ayin is the creative force that brings the yesh hanivra into being. Now, the ayin, which means nothing, as we explained yesterday, is thus aptly and appropriately termed for both the perspective of the yesh hamiti and the yesh hanivra. He's speaking about das elyon and das tachten, essentially. So for the yesh hamiti, for the Eibishter, this ha'orah, this revelation by which he creates is ayin, is completely bottled. The merest glimmer. So it's nothing in that sense. Nothing, no thing. It is the merest glimmer of him, is not expressive of him. And at the same time, of course, therefore having no existence per se itself. The ayin up for the yesh hanivra is because it's beyond its ken. There's no thing that exists in its own world. Now the chiddush here is that the ayin itself is, in other words, the oir, to make it in simple language. Yesh hamiti is atzmos, or the oir in sof hamaitzel, and the yesh hanivra is creation, and the ayin is the oir. Now the proti is the oir divides into two, as it were. Lifnei tzimtzum and post tzimtzum. So the chiddush of the Maimer is that notwithstanding that it's still one darge, it's still called oir, ha'orah, as opposed to a ha'orah of a ha'orah. And the simple distinction between the two is, I said I'd address it today, a little in more detail. What's the difference between ha'orah and ha'orah of ha'orah? And Tanya speaks of a third level, ha'orah of ha'orah of ha'orah. That in general, And again, the language is loose because sometimes ha'ara is in contrast to oir. Here it's not. Here we mean oir. When you're speaking lagabe the mo'ir, so I use the word oir. When you're speaking lagabe the mites on atzmos, the term ha'ara is more frequently used, more appropriately used, because mo'ir means it'll produce oir, but atzmos doesn't have to produce anything. Atzmos decides to. The English decides to reveal himself. It's not oir in the classic sense. That is the natural expression of the mo'ir. It's now ha'ara. He's expressing a glimmer of his presence. Hence the different language, ha'ara and oir. But we mean here oir. So the difference between a ha'ara and a ha'ara of a ha'ara is simply that ha'ara is dovuk, dvekus nikeres, and ha'ara da'ara is a dvekus she'ein nikeres, which is usually a term used to describe the kelim, which you actually refer to later, which means in simple language as a muscle. Oir means a light where the dvekus nikeres means that it's readily apparent where the light comes from. Quite simply, going outside, the sun is shining and it's light and you can see, and it's not lost on anyone that it's from the sun. That's ha'ara, that's oir. Dovuk. What's ha'ara of ha'ara? So it's daylight outside, but the person's in the house and there is a screen and a curtain. Now the house is illuminated somewhat, but he cannot know is it because there's some strong, is it the sun, or is it some other source of light that's outside that has made its way filtered through the screen and illuminates the house. So that's a dvekus, which is ein nikeres. It's light, but it's not obvious. Kol kach, that's a lashon chassidus sometimes. So much by deductive reason, looks at the time. It's not a lamplight. It's the sun outside. You know, one can trace it back fairly easily, but you got to trace it back. It's not obvious. It's not obvious. The light in the home. What's the source of it? Where is the source? What is the source? There's some deductive reasoning required. That's ha'ara da ha'ara. So what is he saying? He's saying that that's not the case. That's not the case of the oir lifnei tzimtzum lagabe the oir achar tzimtzum. Notwithstanding the tzimtzum, it's still dovuk. Big chiddush, still dovuk. Even the oir post tzimtzum, which is where Atzilus is, which he wants to explain. The moshel he gave is a seichel, an idea that the Rav is giving over to the Talmud. So there's the idea, the way the Rav entertains it, and then there's the idea as he articulates it to the Talmud. It's not another idea. It's the same concept, the same seichel. But when he is entertaining it in his own mind, so that level that would be entertained to the Talmud is completely bottled. But then, when using the language of the HACHODESH, he removes his great light to the side, creating the mokem panoi, right, in the deceptively simple language of the HACHODESH, hence open to such misinterpretation. In the Nimshol, it's the Rav not thinking about the idea the way he understands it, but the way he's going to articulate it, that's not something else. That's not akin to the Moishe we just gave of the curtain, the screen, and the room lit, and it's not clear where this light comes from. This is the seichel of the Rav, Kipshuta. There's nothing else. Teacher talks and the Talmud hears. Nothing is lost. That this is not the teacher's idea. But it's not just because he sees the teacher speaking. That's not the point. It's the point of seichel. If you look at the seichel, the way it is in the mind of the Rav, and the seichel, the way it is articulated to the Talmud, oto davar. It's the same idea. So therefore, the two levels of the ayin, that's what he says in the beginning of the ois. The two levels of the ayin, the oir is really one. Lifnei tzimtzum post tzimtzum. So the oir natzilus is still dovuk, not so that to translate all of that in simple language, it means that the oir as is manifest in natzilus, it's not lost there this simple truth. This is how Hashem is choosing to manifest himself in HaSpheres. The emphasis is not the HaSpheres, but this is God's revealing himself. That's what's revealed in Atzilus. Biyah, on the other hand, they're already, the Spheres themselves assume intrinsic value. Chachma, Bina, these are wonderful things, wonderful virtues. In Atzilus, there's no Chachma. Bina is the Eibish's Chachma, the Eibish's Bina, and that's why it's virtuous. That's the truth. It's an oil which is still Davuk. And the Kudah is, Moishe Rabbeinu is an Neshama Atzilus, which means even as he comes down the Mata, he says at the end, it's Elikus Mamish, and hence, even the Ashba of Basar, which is Ma'ayin, Moishe Rabbeinu said, Ma'ayin li Basar, Stam there's a diak, Ma'ayin li Basar, there is Ma'ayin li Basar. Where should I get meat from? But it's the same term here, Ayin. But it's here, the Ayin is actually both Pirush. It's a great descent from me, Ayin, it's not my world. The Ashba to you comes from Ayin, because it's above your world. But at any rate, even the Basar, Gashmi, had to come from Moishe Rabbeinu, everything, all the Ashba'is. Why? Because that's the whole Chiddush, that even the Mata, he remains in the Neshama Atzilus, as he engages the Mata, and brings to the Mata Elikus, reveals Elikus, that's his purpose, and to reveal and unlock that within us. Okay, there's more Hasbara coming now. Let's continue. Beis Dalet. That's somewhat clear. Yeah, okay. Okay, friends, again, somewhat, as we speak of geography of Elikus, you have to get the geography, the terms, and then try to understand it. Let's get the level straight. No matter how Bogushim, we're understanding it. Kelim, Oidus, lights and vessels, Achadain Tzarich Lahavin. They have a question. Geras HaKodesh Isa, Rebbe says that in a Geras HaKodesh Simchaf, Neshamas Atzilus Yotzu v'Nifred. Let's get the word straight. Neshamas of Atzilus. That's what we're talking about. Moishe Rabbeinu, Neshamas of Atzilus. Yeah, we just finished saying that the Lamata. You see Lamata where he's Lamayla. But he says in Tanya that Neshamas Atzilus Yotzu v'Nifredu me'hakelim. That Neshamas of Atzilus emerged and became separate. In other words, become Neshamas of Atzilus from the Kelim. Shebehem melubash hakav me'erin sof. In the Kelim is melubash the kav, the projection of the erin sof. It's not the eir itself. Veinim elikus mamish. That's the Loshen in Tanya. They're not actual elikus. Rak me'en b'chinas elikus, but a reflection of God, the God-like, but not godliness. But tzimtzum otzim, but tremendous tzimtzumim is from the tzimtzum barishan. Not just the tzimtzum barishan, but the kelim of Atzilus, which is a further tzimtzum. So how can we say that Moishe Rabbeinu lemata is like the level of Atzilus, which is dovuk and miyuchud? It's, as we said, it's a dveikus nekeres. It's attachment where the transparent connection to the source is transparent. But the connection to the source is transparent, and that's how we use lamata. No, she's in Tanya. The shamas Atzilus don't come from the oil. The whole point is the oil. Come from the kelim. Pasha is a technical question. Yeah. And kelim conceal, and kelim are otherness already. And kelim is already recipient of elikus. In simple language. And keli is a makabel of elikus. And we're saying, no, Atzilus is not a makabel of elikus. Atzilus is elikus. And these neshamas, the shamas Atzilus, retain that lamata even in the guf. But they're not. They're recipients. That's what he says in Tanya. They're kelim. They come from the kelim. Question's clear? Yeah. Good. Understands by prefacing what it says in Medrash on the pasuk. See, says the Eibishter to Moishe, I've made you a likim, literally a god, the Lord to overpower. So the Medrash says as follows: Hashem is called the honorable, better word, Melech HaKoved. Yeah, the honorable king. So the simple pshat is that the word covered is referring to him. He is the honored king. So the Medrash gives another title. He's called Melech HaKoved because he dispenses covered. The fish covered because he dispenses, he gives covered honor to those that fear him. Ketzad, how so says the Medrash, Melech basav adam ein dreich min al susay ben yosh min al kisay. A king of flesh and blood, one doesn't ride on his horse or sit on his throne, horse, or sit on his throne. V'akadosh Baruch Hu hishiv shleim al kisay, and the Eibush to put Shleima on his throne. Shenamar, it says in Pasuk, in Divrei Yomim, Yeshev Shleima al kisay avay lemelech, and Shleima sat upon the throne of God as king. As for his horse, v'hirkev Eliyahu al susay, and Eliyahu Hanavi rode his horse. What is Hashem's horse? Sufa v'sara, that means tempest and storm. That's God's horse, which God rides, as it were. We find the idea of riding on the clouds. Reichev anonim. What does it say about Eliyahu? Eliyahu b'sara shomayma, and Eliyahu ascended in a storm heavenwards. So he rode on the Eivishter's steed. That's the term, right? Yeah. Melech basav adam meini. Medrash continues. Melech basav adam meini kroim b'shmoi. The king is not referred to by his name, by his first name. He's called king. Actually, the Medrash says they're Caesar, Augustus. These were terms that the Roman emperors used to refer to themselves and became names thereafter. The first one, and called themselves Caesar thereafter. They were called Caesar and they were Augustus. That's the mashal Medrash gives. That was the mashal for the time. But no one is called by his name. You don't call him by his name. You don't call him, king. You call him Caesar.
Okay. Yeah, but people refer to him Melech Shleima.
When you address him, you don't say Melech Shleima. You can just call him Melech, the king.
Okay.
That's our pasuk now. This is how the message began. But the Eibishter calls Moishe by his name. See now that Moishe was protesting, going. See now I've made you Elikim to Paro. So you will master him. End of Medrash. That would appear not understood. How can mortal man be called by a name of God? Elikim is one of the divine names. This is divinity. Now, explaining the question further, we encountered this in the Basi Lagani Maim of this year. 3 pirushim. Here I brings 2 of them. On what? What the names of God mean? What are they? One God. Why so many names? God will do. What is it? So many names. So there's a pirush about Shem Tev. This is not the kasha. This will be a teretz. Explain that according to the Baal Shem Tev, this is more than Yom friends, the part of this. Baal Shem Tev, Alter Rebbe. Shehuvah b'drosh Chassidus brought in Chassidus is bringing out Yom now. Shezai, now Hashem is saying about Kalim. The 7 names of God are not God's expression. It's the Kalim. It's already a receptacle. It's already an otherness to these names. That what are the names, says the Baal Shem Tov? The names of the 7 names are the divine force which emanates the Kalim in brackets. There's 2 things in the Kalim. There's the oil that's invested in the Kalim, and then there's the Kalim itself has its own chayis, as we learned at length in the Basi Lagani Maimer. Which means that Keich HaBli Gvul and Keich HaGvul by divine intent are 2 contrasting and separate expressions of him. In the end, it's all him. Avayahu likim. But by divine design, God initially sets in motion a duality. The duality is blikvul and gvul, oid and keli. So that's what it means that the kelim have their own chayus, because the koyach hagvul, the koyach to contain, is an opposite koyach of expression. So the Baal Shem Tov says, it's what's the pshat, the 7 names of the Eibishter we're talking about, the kelim of Atzilus. So Osi Shapi, so then it comes good. We have no steer between what Baal Shem Tov said and Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Even after the neshamas have emerged from the kelim of Atzilus, that's their point of origin. That's where they become neshamas, individual neshamas. So it's all very good that Shayach the Kleisam B'Shem is the kelim. We can call them the names of the kelim. That's their source. Moishe is called Shem Alikim, and that's one of the 7 names. So it's Shayach to call on the neshama on these names. It's not Mamish Elikus. It's the kelim. The names of the Eibishter do not refer to him per se, but rather the kelim of Atzilus. It's sort of beer, obviously, much more than we're discussing it now, but let's just get the general idea. Let's continue. Because the kelim have emerged from this source, and it's like their connection to the source is not transparent. It's a dveikus which is not obvious. That the keli therefore deserves legitimately an identity of otherness, not a likus, not Eibishter. It's a recipient of the divine expression. That's what these names are. These names are vessels, recipients of divine expression by which God governs the world. So we don't have such a big kasha. We have no kasha. We've resolved the question. So just like the kelim are called with the 7 names, so neshamas can also be called such with these names. Hence, so that's pshat medrash that the rein is satich elikim lepara. Because what's elikim? Elikim is one of the 7 names, and the 7 names is not elikus mamish. It's a keli, not the expression of the oir, the natural expression of elikus, but the Eibishter invested himself in a particular keli, and that is therefore appropriate to understand that a neshama who comes from the kelim d'Atzilus, as Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, should be called Shem Alikim. So we don't have a problem. We can reconcile that with what? With the Pirush of Baal Shem Tov. Clear? Yeah? But in light of that, which Alter Rebbe says, on the Pasuk Moishe Daber V'Elikim Yanena B'Koyel, referring to Matan Torah. There, the Alter Rebbe says, "Shazayin Hashem Yisrael B'Chinas Ha'Oiris HaMistabshem B'Kelim." No, the Shem is the direct, fluid, natural expression of the Eibishter, not Ha'Ora Da'Ora. In other words, Oir B'Kelim. It's not the Oir which is Machai the Kelim, which comes through a Gvul and a concealment. But mamish the oir in the movement efshes shanashoms sheyotzu v'nifredu ma'kelim. So it's not understood that what's the pshat that the neshamas that come from the kelim. We mean here what? The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, kelim means keli. So how could they be called? How could neshama Moshe Rabbeinu Lamata be called Elikim? That's what says the Alter Rebbe is the oir which is davuk. In brackets, the LOCHEM is built in the keres, not like the kelim. And the shamas sheyotzav v'nifredu ma'kelim, it's come from there. So we have a steer. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, steer in the Alter Rebbe, that the shamas come from where? From what? Kelim. That's still, it's not the oir. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu is called Shem Alikim. Now Alter Rebbe says Shem Alikim is not the keli, but the oir. A contradiction. Oir or keli. Simple. Clear? And that's the original problem of the Zala began with. What do you mean he's like Atzilus Lamata? He's not. It's only the Keli, not the Eid of Atzilus, which is the Ikir. So we have a steer in the Alter Rebbe. A steer in the Alter Rebbe, and therefore the message is not understood, according to the Alter Rebbe. What does it mean, Rei Nesatich, Lekim Lefaroi? How can you say on the Neshama, on the bus of a dome, such a term? Now the question, he goes back now is even on the Pirish of Baal Shem Tov. Let's go back a little bit. Let's continue. Even according to the Baal Shem Tov, it goes on the shame is going the kelim goes have a shaila. Gam the Pirish of Baal Shem Tov Shazayin Hashem is in back kelim tzarich lovin. The shaila is the other way. This is a new thing. Don't worry. You'll be able to overcome Pari because in the Saticha Elikim, that's what Hashem is. That's what he is to begin with. Now the Abish is conferring this. Now the according to the Baal Shem Tov, the Elikim goes on the Kelim, and the Kelim is where the Neshama Datzilis come from. That's his level to begin with. Being in the Neshama Datzilis is already a level of the Shemus. Shubha Kelim. What's added now? The Kash of the Baal Shem Tov is the opposite. Kash al Trevis, how is this possible? According to the Baal Shem Tov, that's what it is. To begin with, nothing's being conferred. So what's added now, according to the Baal Shem Tov, questions clear. Contrasting questions. The Alter Rebbe, how could it be? According to the Baal Shem Tov, it's to begin with. Nothing's being added now. In the Abish is saying see now, which probably some kind of gilui. Now that's his dog. Kelim Datzilis. Are we clear? Yeah. Chayyin of the matter is, but the answer to all the above is as follows: the mashakos of Neshamas. This which the Alter Rebbe says, that where the Neshamas come from, it's from the Kelim, Shemel B'Shakav, and not the Eir. Becomes a gewaldige Chiddush, friends. Haino ben Neshamas Commission L'Mayla. That's why the Neshamas L'Mayla Taka. They emerge, and what is their identity? The identity is Gvul, Keli, a recipient, and other. At the loftiest level. The words of Alter Rebbe in Tanya, they are, what the word they used before? Divine-like, but they're not divinity. That's where the Neshama Salamayla. Big news. Through the Neshama coming down here and doing Torah mitzvahs, in other words, Moishe engaging a paradise, Moishe engaging Mitzrayim. So this unlocks an inyan atzmi, an ascent in the neshama. The malka loshen, which means to be drawn to the gufa de malka, the very essence of a likus. To rephrase that, the dafka neshama coming lamata, this is what unlocks within it the chelik alaka, the mamish, the chelik alaka mimal. This the neshama was to begin with an atzilus, but the mamish. That only happens when it comes into the mamish of the guf. Mamish having the two pirushim, it means in Tanya, the Chemeni, the Hayom Yom, the Rebbe brings that his father explained to him that mamish is two opposite pirushim. Chelik lakam imal, mamish the Eibishter, and mamish also means to touch, to feel, mamoshes. That's the chiddush. So the chiddush is not only that even as it comes into the mamoshes of a guf, it retains its chelik alakam imal mamish lemaila. It's more than that. It's dafke when it comes to the mamoshes of the guf that the mamish of the neshama is revealed. That it's mamish, meaning to say mushish and atzmus. Mamish, and that's lost on the neshama as it first emerges as a neshama in its most pristine and loftiest sublime level. Kelim datzilas, That's ein beginnes elikus. One with me, says the Eibishter, when I'll send you down into the goof and you'll deal with the parai, nishcha the chavia, the serpent's skin, and you'll struggle with all of that, and you wonder where I am, you won't even know who you are. And all of that struggle, you'll discover and reveal Vishtaba b'gufa de malka, which means this longing to be drawn b'gufa de malka to the very, literally the body of the king, atzmus mohus. Shizah concludes Ali lebchinas mistabish bekelim. So in the words of the Maimir here, now the neshama lamata touches the oy, which is mislabish in the king, not just the keli. Keli means just something else. You're not something else. You're one oy. You one thing with the likus, inseparably. That's only in this gala, the oy property that Rebbe speaks of in the Altem Torah oy explains the shemes. That the neshama only accesses lamata. And it's not what he speaks about in Tanya. That's the source. And that's what the Medrash is saying. That's the chiddush of the neshama coming down lamata. Not just from Moishe, but for every neshama. As he goes on to say, it's not just true of Moishe Rabbeinu, but it's every year. Famous Medrash Shekol, Echad Lechem Yisrael, every individual Yid, Yachol, Loima, is able to say, which also means he's empowered to say, by through his avodah down here, when will my behavior reach my actions, the actions of my forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and he adds in brackets, including Moishe Rabbeinu. Let's continue. As it's known that even we shouldn't forget neshamas of atzilus, even us neshamas the biyah, we are malchus the malchus nasir. But the core essence is elikus. Each one of us, each yid says, each one neshama should to be tahirahi. She's pure. She's madregas atzilus, not kelim of atzilus only. The gil of atzilus. But what's the difference? This is difficult words to understand, but that's the mitzias. The neshamas of biyah is elikus becoming a nivra. Again, tzarich iyon godel, what this means. Tol arichas and chassidus. I should say that the Tanya before Eres, I think it's called what's called Tanya Eres. Meichel Menachem has in the back in the Yunim much elaboration on this in Yun, because this is where it all begins in Chelik Peribes of Tanya. What does it mean? Likus nas and divra. At any rate, in neshama, that's the same beginning of likus mamish. So neshama's the biyah is that in terms of consciousness, this is the mitzius. In terms of consciousness, neshama's the biyah assume a sense of complete separation, nivra, creation. The godly core is hidden. But neshama, that's the same beginning of likus mamish. But neshamas of atzilus are neshamas down here that don't lose that at all, that sense of separation. It's still in a goof, there's nemesh bahamis, but so this is what's happening. Coming down the mata, the Eibishter system motion as saticha likim lepara. That's the chiddush of neshama atzilus, but it's only unlocked even for neshama atzilus. When what? When you come down to dealing with the parai, Shakadosh Baruch Hu called Moishe b'shmoi. The Eibishter calls him on his name. Meaning, even though your source the mailos and the kelim, you should know that you are neshama that silas by you. This can be begoloi, and what brings that out is the challenge, and it's true of all neshamas, he says. But by neshama that silas in a revealed way, you have the koyach to connect to a higher level than your original conscious source. The oil, the least beginner's dvekas nikeres, even the matter, to have an attachment that is obvious and unveiled, even lemata, greater even than your dvekas that you had lemaila in the shamba datzilus, where it was only mitzad kelim. That you have rein saticha here dafka lemata. This is what unlocks this within you, our essential bond. And be'emes, it's true for every neshama. Even the neshamas the biyah. But for neshamas the biyah, it's in a much more latent and essential way. For Moishe Rabbeinu, it's conscious and transparent, but it only comes to the fore when he deals with parting. That's why the Rebbe explains, Chassidus says, that's the reason why he was kvat peh. And with 2 stages in Moishe Rabbeinu. Beginning, he said, that going to the diyukim. Beginning, he was slow to speak, then he couldn't speak at all. When he couldn't speak at all, when he actually confronted Paro. What's the pshat? Not speaking is his complete bittul when he's speaking. Who's he? When did he have this complete bittul? Around. First he was kvad peh, slow, heavy of speech. Then he says, Ani aral svasayim. I am uncircumcised lips, which means closed. Closed. This is the deepest level of bittul that he only achieved when he faced Paro, which is why Aaron had to speak for him. You couldn't articulate. Why? Because it's tachlis bittul. Eibishter, there's no me here. Can't speak. Even filtered through his words, he couldn't do. Complete bittul. So if he can't speak, why is he there? So just send Aaron to speak. So that explains. It's a Rashi Sikha Bemes. It's all the Yukim in the Rashi. The end comes out this Meredi Kabir. That what broke Paro was Moshe Rabbeinu's presence, Elikus. But what am I supposed to do? So Aaron told him he's supposed to do. Aaron gave him the message. But the bittul Moshe Rabbeinu peiled, which in simple language all of us means is the effect we have on another is not the words we say. So it's who's saying them. That's what has the effect. And how true and the empathy and the bittul. If it's coming from there, then your words will be successful. Because they're all the nicest words in the world. But it's not coming from a place of bittul and truth. And it's not going to be pale in yonah.